Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. So, I've never done this before. This is my first time. All right, so y'all gonna have to bear with me. I'm not a public speaker. I am very much a. I'm gonna write it out and I'll just put it out there. Y'all do with it what you will. So, as I figure this out, bear with me. Please comment, add your comments because I'm basically going to be kind of walking through the events that I saw Wednesday and how it kind of affected me. But please chime in, say whatever you feel you need to say. This is a safe space. No judgment unless you deny the fact that, black people have humanity. Then you're going to be judged a little bit. A lot. But other than that, no judgment. Um, okay, so three things that I saw that I kind of categorized everything into cognitive dissonance, white privilege, and domestic terrorism. And as I talk, I'll get into all of that or whatever. Um, but let's kind of walk through the events of what happened. So Wednesday, we see what was a planned event because for stuff like that, you have to have permits. So it was planned. Um, the violence was planned by some of the participants, at least not all of them, maybe, I don't know. But it was planned, and we saw a group of primarily white men and women mob a federal government building. Okay, during a debate session for that was to contest some of Joe Biden's um, wins in particular states or whatever. So you're protesting at something that you wanted, okay? Y'all should have wanted this to happen so you could have y'all senators or whatever, including Marsha, object the proper way. Why y'all chose this time, I don't know, because this was a perfect time for people to, or the senators to object. Whatever. Um, we see them spreading the Rona. Now mask inside, okay? Spreading the germs everywhere. Okay, that one old lady in that meme, she had her mask, but it was on her chin, so non effective. Um, we saw that it was an attack that was instigated by the racist rhetoric of President Donald Trump. Now, I'm a huge proponent of firmly placing blame where it is supposed to be, and so we're going to blame these people for their own actions. However, the fire was stoked by Donald Trump's rhetoric. Like we can't just move past that, act like it didn't happen, because it did. Um, it was really born out of a baseless claim, and really a claim that has no evidence to this day that the election was stolen from him. Where and how? To this day, multiple lawsuits have failed in multiple courts in multiple states. Okay, we know nothing happened, but still, he has a fan base that believes and hangs on his every word, regardless of truth. So that's what occurred. Um, let's get into my first point. About the three things that I said were on display: domestic terrorism. So domestic just means it was in our own land. Um, terrorism is using violence to further your agenda. So if we talk about terrorism in other aspects, we've seen terrorist attacks on the United States, and it's to further whatever group's agenda it was. So these people had an agenda. They used terrorism, domestic terrorism, to try to further it. Did they succeed? No, but we'll get there too. Um, so some more words that have been kind of thrown around because we see them all the time, but people don't really go into it. So sedition. I got my notes, y'all. I also got my glasses because I cannot see. I got my readers like an 80-year-old woman. I'm blind. So bear with me. So sedition, insurrection, and treason. So these are words that have been tossed around. So let's talk about what they mean. Um, so sedition is the act of inciting resistance against lawful authority, which, from my understanding, doesn't necessarily mean violent acts. Um, I believe that's where the treason and insurrection come in. So that's why these words haven't necessarily been used interchangeably, but have been used together. Ignore me, y'all. I'm sorry. I probably look like somebody's grandma, but I really can't see. Let's see. Insurrection is revolting against established government, and treason is defined by overt acts of attempting to overthrow the governing state. So that's why there's some differences between these vocabulary words that people or news outlets are throwing around. So that's why they're using them all together. They're calling it treason and sedition and insurrection, because there's some slight differences, which, in my opinion, all of those things are true based on what I saw. But also, let's have some context, because like last year, there were laws created to have harsher punishments for these things. So even beyond last year, these are the types of words that were created for the other. So minorities, or people that don't look like our founding fathers, so to speak, these are words created for us. So the system isn't supposed to be set up to have persecution and consequences for the actions of white people. These words were created for minorities, or people that don't look like white people. Like, that's the reality. And so now that's where some of the outrage is coming from, is, oh no, it's not all this, it's just our patriotism. No. It was real treason-y to me. It looked a little treason-y and a little insurrection-y to me, based on the definitions that I just discussed. All right? Let's be honest. And y'all feel free to comment if y'all disagree. That's fine. We're in a safe space. I know all of y'all, so, say whatever y'all want to say. It ain't gonna be no beef. So going back to the three things that I said were on display, in addition to the domestic terrorism, cognitive dissonance. Now, I know that's kind of a therapy word, but it basically means, so if somebody is exhibiting some cognitive dissonance, it means their actions are in direct contradiction to their long-held and firmly rooted in beliefs. So in this case, there were a couple of things that definitely display some cognitive dissonance. Let's talk about the whole Blue Lives Matter. If you know anything about, if you know me personally, I can't even speak for everybody else. If you know me, you know I can't really say that I would be a part of the organization Black Lives Matter, but do I believe that those words are true? Absolutely. So what happened is that Blue Lives Matter is a slogan that was born out of Black Lives Matter. People didn't like it, and so, okay, we're going to change it to Blue Lives Matter, which doesn't make sense because it's not a racial thing. Blue isn't the color of their skin. That's their profession. So really, it was really out of retaliation for that slogan. People don't like it. Okay, well, and y'all are protesting. You Black people are protesting police brutality, which in our minds does not exist. So, bam, Blue Lives Matter it is. Okay, but it's dumb. So, going back to the cognitive dissonance of it all, you guys, this is the very same crowd that is shouting Blue Lives Matter, but they didn't matter Wednesday. Okay? They walked all over, pummeled some of these police officers, these fine men and women in blue. Now, I'm not anti-police. I've had both good and bad experiences with the police. But the reality of it is that's their profession and they do their job. I want reform. I don't want to burn the system to the ground and start over. Why reinvent the wheel when you can reform it? That's my personal opinion. But I digress. So this cognitive dissonance, where was Blue Lives Matter at during this? because if I'm not mistaken, a police officer he was killed as a result of his injuries. So where was this? So your actions are in direct contradiction with your belief. But the reality is that's a belief you only hold in response to Black lives saying that they have value. That's the reality. Um, Furthermore, calling themselves patriots. So when we talk about like America and what patriotism means to people, that's not patriotic to me. Now, granted, I'm not a huge gung ho, America's the best nationalist type of person. America is largely ghetto, in my opinion, okay? It's real ghetto here. However, I get it that some people are very much, this is the land of the free, home of the brave. My family members have died for here and yada, yada, yada. I get that. I also have military members of my family or family members that are in the military, and they have also died for America. But also, let's think back to historically, when Black people were dying for America, they weren't even allowed to use the same water fountain when they got back home. So you can take your patriotism and shove it. But again, I digress. If we're going back to what was happening on Wednesday, that was not very patriotic. So the government that you say should have, taken control when Black Lives Matter protests were going on, why didn't y'all have the same kind of energy for your own issues, your own baseless claim that Donald Trump should have been president? Hold on, let's see. I think it's easier for people to counter Black Lives Matter with Blue Lives Matter because it gives them an out. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. It does give them an out. Like, you don't have to face the fact that Black people are saying, I don't want to be killed. I don't want people that look like me to be killed. And you're completely disregarding that fact and saying, oh, well, Blue Lives Matter. Like, what's wrong with admitting the justice system has issues and disparities that are surrounding an entire race and moving from it and doing better? There's nothing wrong with it. Every day we make mistakes. There's nothing wrong with saying, okay, this is wrong. We need to move forward. But I completely agree with you, Melody. It's a whole lot easier for people to kind of disregard someone's plight because it assuages their own guilt. I completely agree with you. Let's see, where was I at? So also, let's talk about the looting too. Let me tell you, all last summer, I heard some really non-sympathetic and empathetic things. Now, granted, I am completely against taking things that do not belong to you. Completely against it. However, in some of the instances, I understood because we were in the middle of a pandemic and some people were taking things that they needed. So while I'm against it, I kind of understood. Again, this is the same group of people that said when the looting starts, the shooting starts when it comes to Black people. Where was that energy? Okay? Keep that same energy. Where was it? It was non-existent. Okay? Keep that same energy. But no, they were taking things that did not belong to them. Mail, podiums. Like, I read one article that said someone defecated and spread feces everywhere. Now, I don't know how true that is, but I would not put it past them. I read various articles that said that people brought pipe bombs or whatever. So this could have ended a whole lot worse than what it did, even though it really was incredibly tragic. Also, and we're talking about cognitive dissonance. One point that I did miss, I want to go back to. Yeah, they stole artwork. Yeah, and these are things that like cost a lot of money. Like, it's a federal government building. Like, but yeah, that you're right. Going back to what we visibly saw, even beyond like the cognitive dissonance, there were police officers that were letting them in. So I saw footage of police officers trying to stop them and being kind of overtaken, but I also saw some footage of them being let in. So one of my favorite memes that is tragically true is when they were talking about how you never see Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus in the same place. So these hate groups that were on full display were off work police officers, off work military. Okay, you're right, because you don't see Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus in the same place. You know, where's the military? Where's the... And I had somebody comment that we're no longer friends on here because she would have got cussed out had she kept talking to me. I had somebody comment, she was like, well, the military is off because, you know, we had to quarantine after Christmas or ha ha ha. Okay, I'm not talking about that, girl. It was a rhetorical question. But I digress. But yeah, so we saw that too. But I'll get into that later on. So again, back to the cognitive dissonance, it shows the mental stability of these people. Like, you're completely operating contrary to what you previously held. But let's be real, y'all held those beliefs because it had to do with black people. So let's dig further into some of these contrasts with Black Lives Matter protests. So one of the rebuttals that I've seen a lot is that, you know, well, Black Lives Matter did it, so we could do it. So let's park there for a minute, because largely across the nation, Black Lives Matter protests were peaceful. Now closer to the epicenter of some of the things that happened, so we're talking like in George Floyd City, or even in I want to say Jacob Blake and Ahmaud Arbery. We're talking about those cities. Things got bad, but cities weren't destroyed. Okay, like they weren't burnt to the ground. So that's some of the things that I'm seeing. But it also is reminiscent of, I work with kids, so it's reminiscent of, well, so and so did it. That's what the kids say when they get in trouble. Well, Lil Johnny did it. That's a very childish type of logic to have in reality. If we're looking at what these protests, as opposed to the riot on Wednesday, was born out of, so every protest I participated in was peaceful. Across Tennessee, generally, they were peaceful, except for the one in Nashville that somebody who wasn't even a part of the protest, he set something on fire. He was white. Let me tell you, black people don't mess with fire. Black people do not mess with fire. And ask a black person that you know. We don't do fire. But yeah, dude got arrested or whatever. So that wasn't even us. So when we're having peaceful protests born out of wanting reform in the police department, or opposing police brutality, or just bringing awareness to the fact that black bodies are being murdered. Ahmaud Arbery was jogging. Tatiana Jefferson was in her house. Botham Jean was in his house. These people were minding their business. And even if in the instances where crimes were committed, police officers are not meant to be judge, jury, and executioner. Like, that's the issue. So it's not black people saying, oh, no, we shouldn't have, repercussions and consequences for our downfalls or us committing crimes. That's not it. It's saying, can we get to the courtroom without being murdered? Okay? That's the issue. But in some instances, like, we just get killed. Like, that's the reality of it. Trayvon Martin, like I mentioned, Tatiana Jefferson, Botham Jean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Philando Castile, on and on and on and on. And those are just names that I could think off the top of my head. I don't have that written down, okay? It's sad. So when we're trying to compare and contrast, you can't even really compare the two, because on Wednesday, what was a riot was because you guys lost. It's not because of anything valid. So, like, that's a huge difference. And let's not even say anything of the response. So peaceful protests last summer were met with heavy artillery. Okay, military police coming out in riot gear before anything ever popped off. So they get wind of it, they coming, they showing up. Even a couple here, you got police officers on deck, okay? And Clarksville is a small city. What's really gonna pop off? And granted, I'm glad y'all have a police presence, whatever, what have you. But to have it met in anticipation with such a police presence, when on Wednesday y'all had to know, because again, things like that, you have to have permits for a gathering that big. You can't just show up. There had to be some sort of organization. Let me tell you, and I've seen footage too. They got Civil War merch. Not Civil War the Marvel movie. These people were planning violence and made merch for it. You can't tell me that y'all didn't have wind of this. And where was everybody at? So even then, the National Guard took hours to show up. Not the same with Black Lives Matter protests. It's not the same at all. So also, okay, let me even take it a step further. So even in these situations where, okay, police have arrived and whatever, what have you. So a lot of times with the protests last summer, when the police arrived, it's guns a-blazing, okay? Excuse me, it's guns a-blazing, tear gas, rubber bullets, all that. Peaceful or not. That's what they coming. They coming out a trigger finger ready. With this situation, again, that's not the same response at all. The vast majority of them just got to go home. They just left. You mean to tell me you broke into a federal government building, stole things, ransacked the place, destroyed things, desecrated this building, and you just got to leave? Which brings me to my third point about what was on display: white privilege. Now, I know some people deny that it even exists, but how can you deny it now? And this isn't just like me guessing. This is firsthand experience. I've been racially profiled for minding my business, okay? A group of white people destroyed a building and just left. They just left. Now arrests are coming out, now, because, and honestly, they probably wouldn't even have been arrested had they been smarter. So when you're planning to go to a protest, well, I say me, because I'm Black and you just never know what's going to happen. You plan. You get bail money. You cover your face. Your face needs to be covered anyway because of the Rona, but you cover your face. You make sure, for example, one thing that if you get pepper sprayed, I used to take milk with me to wash out the pepper spray. You take people with you. You have a plan, meetup location. You do all these things to ensure that you make it home safely. Y'all didn't think this through, okay? Because, faces everywhere. Okay, it was stupid. Y'all should have planned better, but that's neither here nor there. So arrests are being made now, but this is after the fact. They were arresting people on site last summer, okay? Like loading you up in a paddy wagon. Completely different response. So, I have my notes. So, that leads me to kind of my final kind of thoughts about this. So, when we're talking about the response and viewing that as a Black person, that's where the trauma starts to come in for me personally. To know that had that been someone that looked like me, the outcome would have been completely different is heartbreaking. Okay, to know that, we all know that, we all knew that prior to Wednesday. If you are a Black person in the Black community, you already knew you're going to get treated differently if in several different situations. You know that off rip. But to see it and have your suspicions confirmed is heartbreaking. And I was going to do this live yesterday, but I really had to process some things. Like, I had to really work that out. Like, to really get to the root of how I felt, because I was sad and I was frustrated. Like, to continuously watch my people be murdered for less, and then watch the response of the military or the police or whatever, of the government. And it's just like, dang. And so when we're talking about trauma as a Black person, let's get into long-term effects. Because at this point, you can think of 5 or 6 names for the last 10 or 11 years. So when we're talking about effects of prolonged trauma or prolonged exposure to toxic events, toxic stress, it mimics the same kind of symptoms as, like, you know, if you had depression or anxiety or PTSD or things like that. But it's really important that you make the connection to the fact that you are being exposed to something that is extremely toxic and traumatic repeatedly. Okay, so if you found yourself the last couple of days not knowing why you felt so strongly, or you didn't have an appetite, or, you know, you just feeling more stressed out than usual, this because that was traumatic to watch and to know. Even if you're not Black, that was traumatic. Okay, now specifically, I kind of deal with primarily Black people's mental health. But even if you're not Black, that was traumatic to watch. Okay, I'm not a huge, to be honest, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm an independent. So, but I'm not really super into politics. I just follow it because, you know, my life and my rights are at stake. But that was traumatic to watch. If you have loved ones there in DC, that was scary. So it's important to realize that your mental health is very much connected to exposure to some of these tragic, terrible events. These, especially when we're talking about long-term exposure, because the last 4 years has been wild. Wild. On top of that, we're in a pandemic. So racism and corona are co-pandemicing. And then you read comments on stuff, and stupidity is pandemicing along with it. So it's just like, where do I go? What do I do? We have to be proactive about our mental health, especially during times like these. And realize that even though it may not have directly affected you, it is so important to really take stock of your mental health and make sure that you're taking care of yourself. So let's talk about some ways to do that. So one of the things that I really, really enjoy is writing and journaling. Primarily because you can be very, very honest. You can say whatever you want in your journal, and it helps you really confront, it helps you really organize your thoughts. So when I was writing out how I felt about this, it was real all over the place. So I could go back and rewrite it, and kind of make sense of it to kind of deliver it to y'all. But it was real all over the place. But I could write from an honest place because there's no judgment. The paper's not going to judge you. Okay? You can say whatever you need to. I'm a huge proponent of therapy. Go to therapy. If you have the resources and the means, go to therapy. Especially now. Okay? The pandemic has hit a lot of people in very irreversible ways. Okay? We're talking about having to grieve the loss of normalcy, of jobs, of family members. It has been really terrible. And I think, too, if you've kind of been able to bounce back and have a steady paycheck or whatever, you may not realize just how affected other people have been. It's been real tragic for a lot of people. Some other things that I do. Let's see. Support system. Making sure you have a decent support system, and that if you have one, you utilize it. There's no sense in having a good support system if you're not going to talk to them and utilize them. Y'all can talk about everything else, talk about love of hip hop, y'all can talk about what's going on at work, whatever. Y'all can talk about this too. and how it affected you, and it's completely okay. One very important thing that I have to do, and this is just across the board, is when I'm having very strong feelings, confront them, deal with them. So whether that's good or bad, if I am sad or very happy, like take stock of why you're feeling these feelings. Okay, if for example, like I said, I was real sad. I was heartbroken. So I had to sit down and really think, Jericho, why is this affecting you? And nothing directly happened to you. Sometimes you got to confront those strong feelings head on. You got to do the work. If you don't have access to a therapist, which I don't currently, but our company is trying to work something out, but do the work. Okay, do the work. Let's see. When we're talking about coping mechanisms in general, just the black culture, the black community at large, the way we cope is through comedy. So something happens and immediately the jokes are flying. I mean, back to back to back. And it helps us cope because that is our trauma response. Our trauma response is laughter. Okay, we're going to make a joke out of it because it's usually making us want to cry. And I think that's great. But I think we need to add some of the coping mechanisms that I listed just now to our repertoire. Because let me tell you, I have laughed, but I still needed to wrestle with some of the things that I was feeling. Because it's hard to continually see these things happen and not build up an animosity to the people around you. So let me tell you, I have so many white friends that go to bat for me. So, I mean, like, just go to bat for people that look like me in general. 10 toes down, guns blazing, they're going to go to bat for me. But I also am very aware that in Tennessee, there's a lot more people that would participate in a riot like that and have no regard for my life. So trying not to build up animosity to an entire group of people, because I have people in my life that do love me, that don't look like me, that do love me and do support me. It can be really challenging. So I think it's very important that we deal with how we're feeling when these events occur. Also, let me tell you, this is the last thing, and then unless y'all have questions or y'all have comments, this is the last thing. I should not have laughed. And it's a very real possibility that I go to hell for laughing. But that meme about the boneless wing and that person in the wheelchair, when I say I cried laughing, cried. Should not have. 90% probably going to hell. I'm 90% sure. But it was funny. And if you know what I'm talking about, if you know, you know. It was funny. My last suggestion, limit your time on social media, or limit your access to news outlets that are discussing this situation, which kind of, honestly, I feel like they're kind of blowing over it a little too fast for my liking. Like, why are we not making a big deal about the bombs, even though they didn't go off? That's an issue for me. But I digress. Limit your access or your exposure to social media or news outlets talking about it. Do whatever you got to do to protect your sanity. Okay? All right. Thank y'all for hanging out with me for a little bit and tuning in. I love y'all. I appreciate it. If you have any feedback, you can hit my DMs. If you want to chat offline, we can do that too. I'm open to it. Again, I'm not a Facebook Live type of person. I like to write. Or if you have my number, you can just text me. All right. I love you guys. Bye.